Camp Hill Prison is located on the outskirts of Newport on the Isle of Wight. The former Category C prison had the capacity to hold over 500 inmates and has remained vacant, held in reserve capacity by the Ministry of Justice since shutting back in 2013. Earlier this year I uploaded a couple of videos of some of the other noteworthy buildings of the prison estate, Holly Grange and the Firs. As interesting as both these sites are, they kind of pale when compared to the huge empty prison just across the road. Filmed over several undetected visits, this ambitious explore takes a look inside of this well-guarded and huge 16-acre site for the first time since closing. Getting into a secured over 100-year-old prison was always going to be a challenge. The site has been on total lockdown since it closed back in 2013. This meant that every gate had been securely locked and every fence looked solid, high and covered in razor wire. If the physical barriers were not deterrent enough, there was also the danger of CCTV and a 24-hour security presence. This consisted of at least 2 security guards at all time, one on the outside and one somewhere on the inside. There was a good reason why no one had been stupid enough to try and get back inside. We spent several months trying to figure out the best way in. Many late evenings were spent out in the rain and snow searching for possible points of entry. This consisted of rattling gates, testing the CCTV and even staking out the security guards. We spent hours researching the prison online, speaking to former guards and putting together plans of the site. All of our efforts led us to the conclusion that there was only going to be one way in. We were going to have to climb over the fence. The fence that we were looking at was approximately 6 meters high and topped off with a double stack of razor wire. It was made of a heavy duty mesh, so it was likely to support our weight, however the gaps were less than half a centimetre wide. This meant that it would be impossible to climb unaided. It was also not going to be possible to tie onto anything but the very top. The first one up was going to have to do so somehow as a free climb. Fortunately, one of us is an experienced climber, and they devised a crazy way of getting up the fence using hiking crampons and ice axes. The fence was extremely intimidating, and although a fall would be unlikely to kill you, it would have resulted in a really nasty injury, potentially mangled up in razor wire. We went up and over without any problems, and we were now standing literally locked up inside of the prison. It was an amazing feeling knowing that we finally cracked something that only a few hours beforehand felt impenetrable, and at this point it would have been easy to get carried away with the buzz of adrenaline and run off around the site exploring. For all the effort that it had taken so far, we didn't want to blow it by getting caught, and we also didn't want this to be a one and done trip. There was more work that we had to do before the exploring could commence. Firstly, we had to conceal the entrance, as ropes hung up on the fence would have been very obvious to anyone passing or to a night patrol. Once the ropes were taken care of, we then had to carefully scout out the inside of the facility without alerting a guard potentially lurking somewhere inside. This resulted in several hours of carefully creeping around the shadows, trying to identify safe passageways through the site. It was a really nerve-wracking couple of hours as the prison's incredibly noisy. Doors would sway and slam in the wind, lights would flicker and randomly come on or off without warning, and the sound of faulty cell alarms echoed out across the entire site. This all built a constant paranoia that we were being watched from somewhere and that at any moment we were about to get caught. Luckily our vigilance and planning paid off as we managed to get in and out without any issue or drawing any attention to our late night visit. Now with a plan of how to get in, the next couple of weeks were spent regularly visiting and carefully exploring the site. Surprisingly, it didn't take long to find open doors. All of the original prison locks had been removed, assumedly when the site closed as a security measure, and all that remained were a few cheap padlocks which over the years had gone rusty, and many of these had been left open as they were just too corroded to close. We quickly worked out that the CCTV was either not being actively monitored or was just not on. This was quite unexpected, especially considering that the annual cost to maintain and secure the site is almost £250,000 of taxpayers' money. HMP Camp Hill was formally opened in March of 1912 by Winston Churchill. The site was built using prison labour from the neighbouring prison Parkhurst, and work started to construct the new preventative detention prison between 1909 and 1910. Camp Hill was designed to provide a different type of prison, with the aim to reform habitual criminals. The cell blocks were much smaller and less institutional in their appearance when compared to conventional prisons of the time. Initially, 6 cell blocks of 50 were built around a central open gardened area. Camp Hill continued to hold preventative detainees until 1935, where it became a borstal for young offenders. It switched back to holding convicts during World War II, and then returned to being a borstal in 1946. During the 1950s, it briefly held corrective trainees before being transitioned to a Category C prison. During the 1970s, the area of the prison was nearly doubled. The expanded area housed a couple of new wings, which were opened on the 1st of July in 1976, and a series of workshops. Throughout the years, the prison offered many educational and training programs for inmates, and these included electronic repairs, construction industry, textiles, as well as the ability to work on a working farm. In 2008, it was announced that Camp Hill would be merged with the other 2 island prisons, Parkhurst and Albany, to form HMP Isle of Wight. HMP Isle of Wight was officially launched on the 1st of April 2009, with the 3 prisons being combined into one Category B jail, with the capacity to hold around 1,700 inmates. After its merger with the other 2 prisons, Camp Hill was criticised as having relatively high levels of illicit drugs, and after being operational for over 101 years, it was announced in January of 2013 that Camp Hill would be closing its doors as part of a national cost-cutting measure. During the following months, the 467 serving prisoners were transferred to 15 other prison sites, and on the 8th of March 2013, the last prisoner to serve a sentence was escorted and released off-site by the governor, at which point he asked if he could turn out the lights. Every building was then stripped and cleaned, with items being redistributed, refurbished, or stored for possible future use. The official closing ceremony took place on the 19th of April, and ended with officers and other staff marching out of the prison one last time. After multiple visits, we managed to see most of what the huge site had to offer, all under the cover of darkness. I really wanted to capture some daytime footage inside the prison, as many of the buildings were far too exposed to risk turning lights on or using torches. Being inside during the day was going to be difficult. Our multiple visits had already identified that whilst the guards didn't appear to do very much at night, the site was actively patrolled during the daytime, inside and out. In addition to this, the outside of the prison was surrounded by fields, and this made the outer perimeter path a popular dog walking spot. Climbing over a 6-metre high fence during the day would have been a terrible idea, with pretty much 0 chance of getting in and out undetected. The only realistic way of being able to be inside in daylight would be to spend the night and get out early the next morning. We picked a cell block and hung our hammocks up for the night. We picked the block closest to the main gate, as the guards had already left some of the lights on inside, and if the main gate was opened at any point, we'd be able to hear it. We were up early the next morning before first light, so that we could get around and see as much as possible before making a swift exit. The site is still currently owned by the Ministry of Justice, and is still technically retained in reserve capacity. This means that potentially it could be brought back into service if there was a large increase to the prison population, although as the government is actively trying to find buyers for the site, it seems quite unlikely that it will ever reopen as a detention facility. Over the years, there's been much talk of the prison being redeveloped for a number of projects. These include housing and a potential relocation of the Isle of Wight Council headquarters. Structurally, the facility seems to be in a good condition, needing only a few cosmetic touch-ups. Just before I finalised this video, the Prisons Minister expressed an interest to offer Camp Hill to the Isle of Wight Council. Point of making this video, no decision had been made about the location. Shortly after we finished visiting the prison, we were tipped off that the old admin building that once belonged to the farm was accessible. There's almost no trace of the working prison farm, and from the outside the admin building looked relatively unassuming. However, once inside we found that the building was being used to store stacks of old documents from Camp Hill. There were filing cabinets and boxes filled with old records. We found boxes of old ordnance maps of all 3 prison estates, and there were even some signs from the old prison. After having spent several days inside of a cleared out prison, it was really fascinating to be able to spend a few hours looking through as many of the records as we could, and these gave much more of an insight into daily inmate activity. This was a great explore. It was a bit nerve-wracking at times, but it was well worth all of the planning. It is amazing that we managed to get around and see most things without getting detected. I really hope that the release of this video doesn't negatively impact any of the security guards working at the prison. After all, who would be stupid enough to try and bust into a prison? Often when something significant is explored, I'm asked if there's anything noteworthy left to see on the island. There is, and I still have plenty of videos held back waiting for the right time to upload. Hopefully one day soon I'll be able to share some of these with you.